Our final impact is understanding to walk in the prophetic, to walk in the word, and to walk in healing. Please welcome Bleaux Savage to the platform.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Your kingdom come, Lord.
I had to write it down because there was a lot, and I had to condense it. So Pastor Patricia asked me to share my testimony. Some of you probably saw me over like the past 6 months or so on oxygen and even in a wheelchair. So this is how it all started. In 2023, I had 4 ICU visits in total. During each attack, the Lord gave me a revelation, but I'm only going to talk about 3 of the visits today for time. The Lord had told me that higher level warfare was coming. It prepared me and my family 9 months in advance by having us start fasting in January so that we were prepared for a victory. In March, I started coughing for no reason. By September, I was vomiting up to 20 times per day. I could barely hold down food or water and was only able to sleep at most 2 to 3 hours per night. I was unable to recline and had to sleep sitting up at 90-degree angle while still going to work every day. I began having trouble walking and breathing, and it became incredibly difficult and painful. I was told I just had pneumonia and that I was recovering, but I wasn't. During this time, I also had many demonic attacks, and I saw a spirit of death on more than one occasion. The Lord told me that the enemy was attacking my health and coming for my life. During this time, Jesus spoke to me about the authority we have over death. I wasn't sleeping, so I had lots of time to listen. Jesus told me that he was teaching the church authority, the authority that we have over death, because too many of his people are dying prematurely. On September 11th of 2023, we went to the emergency room because we knew something was very wrong, and we prayed before we went in. The Lord gave me a choice. He said, "Do you want to be healed by the doctors or by me?" I chose the Lord. When the medical staff saw that my oxygen was in the low 80s and cycling into the 70s, I was immediately admitted to the ICU and diagnosed with respiratory failure. They literally ran me in a wheelchair to the emergency. I was ran back. The x-rays showed, because they took one immediately, showed that my right lung was fully collapsed and had been for some time, and I had multiple blood clots in my left lung. While in the ICU, I deteriorated through the night, and in the next day, I was having more trouble breathing than when I came in. I was continuing to deteriorate. So they installed a chest tube in my back, and they ended up draining 6 liters of fluid, and over the next 5 days while I was in the hospital. The doctors told me my heart and trachea were pushed over from the fluid, and that I also had fluid around my heart. My resting heart rate was in the 130s and would spike to 160 whenever I moved. And by moved, I mean just sitting up in the bed. I was on 16 liters of oxygen, but my oxygen would drop into the 80s whenever I stood or tried to move. The test results of the fluid they drained came back as stage 4 ovarian cancer that had spread to my lungs. My family and I had about an hour until I was taken back for further tests to locate the ovarian mass, so we warfared. I immediately rejected the diagnosis. As I asserted my will and my faith, the Lord met me with peace, joy, and assurance. There was no crying, there was no hysterics, and there was no fear. I was angry. There was no reason for there to be any fear. When you or your loved one, this is something I want to say to people, when you or your loved one is diagnosed with something, it's not about you. Stop being afraid, stop panicking, and act like you know God. Yeah. And at the end of the day, you have no right to be afraid. If you die, you go to heaven. The enemy is watching to see how far he can go. Your response dictates what happens next. While we were warfaring, Jesus walked through the wall of my hospital room. He reached out his hand to me and he said, "Do you trust me?" And I said, "Yes." And my sister saw him also, so it wasn't because I was on medications. Jesus asked me to trust him because he knew the attack wasn't over and that there was more to conquer. I knew this attack was for me to gain authority over death and to teach others how to do it. When I went for my test an hour later, I knew they would find nothing, and they didn't. Even months later, tests still showed ovarian cancer as the origin, but they couldn't find anything because the Lord had healed me of the source of the cancer. Due to the state of my lungs, I was still considered terminal and was told I only had a few months to live. I was stabilized, and after a week, I was released from the ICU and sent home with oxygen. The hospital wanted me to go home with hospice care. I rejected end-of-life care because I decided I was not going to die. The Lord had healed me of the ovarian cancer, but my lungs grew worse. This is the critical point where many people doubt or are angry with God because he healed them immediately in one area but not in another. You don't have to understand. Stop asking why. It doesn't matter why. Do you trust God or not? God has not done this to you. He's here to help you, but you must trust his strategy and not yours, and not the doctor's, his. In October, the Lord gave me a vision. In the vision, he was holding all the cards in his hands and smiling at me. He picked 2 cards out and laid them face up on the table so I could read them. The first one said no chemo. The second one said no stress. This was a couple of days before my next ICU visit. I had already commanded my spirit not to come out of my body. I had done this because the Lord told me to. I decided that no matter what happened to my body, that my spirit would stay put. I had decided that I was not going to die without fulfilling my destiny. I went in for a biopsy for the lung tumors. Before I went in, the Lord told me there was going to be a complication, but that I would be okay. I coded during the procedure. I stopped breathing. It took the doctors over 3 hours to stabilize me because my bronchial tube had collapsed and they were struggling to intubate me. The doctors did not want to take me off the ventilator, but at the urging of my family, who pointed out that I was breathing above the machine, they complied. After I was taken off the ventilator, I got the results of my PET scan back, and this is all in the same ICU visit. The PET scan came back saying that I had stage 4 lung cancer that had spread to my brain, my bone, and lymph nodes. The results of the lung biopsy still showed as ovarian. I had multiple brain bleeds, and I had a disruption of my blood-brain barrier, multiple blood clots in my left lung, as well as tumors. I was told I had a dead lung, meaning no airflow. I had multiple bone lesions on my hip and one on my spine. After coming off the ventilator, getting the brain and bone cancer diagnosis, the Lord said to me, "You never asked me why." He was pleased. I had never asked him why and never thought to ask it. I never did, because it didn't matter. I said, because I don't need to ask why this is happening, because you're not the one doing it. I was unfazed and unmoved. Me and my family stood in total agreement with the Lord. What the results said didn't matter. We prayed about it and we went back to enjoying our evening. We were laughing, having fun, and we were at total peace. My ICU room was always filled with joy, to the point that some nurses and people who worked there said, "I knew you were Christians when I walked in." The nurses didn't think I understood, some of the nurses didn't think I understood the diagnosis because I was so calm. And because they could hear laughing coming from my room. Victory had already been assured in my mind. The next day, I had back-to-back doctors coming into my room. Literally, doctors lined up outside to tell me that I was terminal. The first doctor, the oncologist who had originally told me I was too far gone for chemo, changed her mind and said that in-hospital chemo might be a good option to help extend my life, and that it would give me maybe a few extra months, and that I would live in hospital until death. The second doctor came in, a radiologist, but when I told her that I cannot lie flat on my back for the procedure because I was unable to breathe laying down flat, radiation was no longer an option, plus she just told me I didn't need it. After the radiologist left, the neurologist came in. The neurologist got in my face, waved her hands in my face, and asked if I could see her. That's not a joke. When I told her yes, she said she wanted to talk to me while I was still in my right mind, and that is a quote. She told me that I may go blind, and once again reminded me that I was terminal. After these exhilarating visits, my family and I laughed because the attack was so obvious. When I rejected the diagnosis from the PET scan, I was bombarded with doctors, each one saying the same thing, kind of like Job's friends. This is how the enemy gets at Christians who are trying to believe for healing. He tries to wear them down until they literally give up. He knows you're tired, in pain, and suffering. He knows the only way to take you out is to get you to agree with what the diagnosis is saying. Because once you agree and you have said yes to death, the enemy cannot kill you and he cannot take your life, and he knows it. But the only way to do it is to actually get you to agree with him. When I tell you we were not stressed or in fear over the diagnosis, I am completely serious. We laughed at the diagnosis, and we laughed because we knew we were winning and the enemy was getting desperate. We knew the worse it looked, the greater the testimony and the greater the glory to Jesus. In November, my family upgraded me from the office chair. I'd been being wheeled around in an office chair because I couldn't walk anymore. And we upgraded to the Healed Mobile, which is the wheelchair that we had purchased. By the end of November, I had lost the ability to walk or stand. It was on the highest amount of oxygen allowable for a house unit and was still supplementing it with an actual tank. I was in tremendous pain and unable to care for myself. My average resting heart rate was in the 140s and 150s, and for the past several months, because my body was working so hard to pump oxygen. My body was swelling from my feet all the way up. I couldn't even wear shoes anymore. The swelling was caused by the severe anemia because my blood vessels couldn't retain their fluid anymore, and it was literally leaking into my tissues. During this time, I was also having multiple thoracentesis procedures to drain 2 liters of fluid out of my lungs every month. On my final visit, after Thanksgiving, my oxygen levels couldn't stabilize and were dipping into the 60s and 70s. I was suffocating to death. My heart rate was also dipping wildly. My right lung had a total whiteout, which means zero airflow, because it was completely now filled with tumors. My right lung only had airflow in the top 1/3. Most people at this point are already dead. I was admitted to the ICU and put on 100% oxygen. The doctors came in and asked me end-of-life questions. For the next 20 hours, I was in and out of consciousness. When conscious, I was speaking in tongues. While this was happening, the doctors told my family that my body was shutting down and I would not make it through the night. They said my heart and lungs were going to give out. My family chose to stand on the word of the Lord and refused end-of-life medications, despite what the doctors and nurses were saying. We had already decided that my family would raise me from the dead if needed. That was literally the backup plan. Yeah. So in this last ICU visit, I was incredibly close to death. But the Lord stepped in. Issues that I had for months resolved. After 21 hours, I woke up, was fully conscious, and able to sleep and hold down food for the first time in months. By the next morning, my oxygen had been lowered from 100% oxygen down to 5 liters. I lost 30 pounds of edema that had accumulated. My heart rate lowered and stabilized. The doctors were astounded that I lived through the night. And then I woke up smiling at them. I was moved to step-down ICU and went home a few days later. 2 weeks after I got out of the ICU, I was trying to regain my ability to walk, but was unsuccessful because I had lost too much muscle in my legs. I couldn't even stand up unassisted and was starting to develop bed sores. One morning, I woke up because I had to sleep on the couch, and the Lord said to me, "Get up." So I did. I was immediately able to stand unassisted and walked across the living room. It scared my family. From this time forward, since I woke up in the ICU the last visit, I've done nothing but recover rapidly and astonish my doctors. In total, I was diagnosed with 4 different cancers and told I wasn't going to live to the new year. The Lord came in and healed me at the final hour. Jesus likes to wait until the last minute because it's frankly more exciting. By the end of January, I was no longer using the wheelchair. I went back to work in March. I was on oxygen for 8 months in total and got off the oxygen completely at the end of April. I also recovered from their severe anemia in June. With every CAT scan and test, I continue to improve and to astound my doctors. My oncologist literally just said, this is miraculous. Whatever it is you're doing, just keep doing it. And I'm continuing just to heal and recover daily. Because we are called to pursue, overtake, and recover all. Afterwards, when I thanked the Lord for my healing, he turned it around and said to me, your faith has made you well.